Today, as you get ready to work on Desmos, which I love Desmos, I'm just going to do a quick example with you first before we start. We're going to talk about that basic parabola, that quadratic from grade 10. We're going to start with a table of values, but in the future you should never have to use a table of values again to graph the quadratic. You've done it a lot in grade 10, it should be second nature to you now, but let's just start off by getting those coordinates. So 0, when you sub in a 0, I'll show the work here, but normally you wouldn't have to do this. We sub in a 0 for x. So these are my x values down here, and this is my x right here. So I'm subbing in for x, I get 0. So that gives me the coordinate 0, 0. What about when I sub in a 1? 1 squared is 1. So I have the coordinate 1, 1. And 2, so you can do all this in your head really quickly. I'm just doing the table. You should never use a table of values for this. I'm just refreshing you with the table of values. That's all we're doing here. The coordinate is 2, 4. So I should really be able to now just keep going down this list and not having to do the math for it. I should be able to do that, but I'm just going to work it out for you here. But I'm going to skip some steps. We get 3 squared. That's going to be a 9. So this coordinate is 3, 9. The next coordinate, negative 3 squared. Let me write this one out because we mess up our negatives sometimes. Negative 3 squared is really negative 3 times negative 3. That's a positive 9. So this coordinate is negative 3, positive 9. We'll do that again with a negative 2. Sub in a negative 2 and we square it. That's really negative 2 times negative 2. That's what the power of 2 means. It means write it out twice. So we get the coordinate negative 2, 4. And then negative 1, same thing, negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. So negative 1, 1. So there's a bunch of coordinates. We should never need a table of values to do that again. Look at the coordinates to determine where to place our axes. So here's our graph. And then we'll plot the points. So look at all these numbers. All my x's, they're pretty small, 1, 2, 3. That's as far as I went up to because those y values started to get big, up to 9. So I can put my x values are small. The biggest y value I have is 9, but all of these y values are positive, which means I can put my x-axis down kind of low here because I'm not going to need to put any points below it. I'm not doing any transformations on this graph. If I were doing transformations, then I would probably put the x-axis right in the middle. So I'm going to put my y-axis through the middle, but the x-axis kind of low. All right, there's my x and y axis, and I've told you before that the tablet I use is very glitchy when I put a ruler on it, so this kind of jumped here, but it should be straight. Of course, your ruler should be straight, and you should be right on top of the grid lines, not in the space between them, so make sure yours is lining up properly on the grid lines. So I look at my numbers here again, looking at my x values, 0, 1, 2, 3, negative 3, so I'm going to actually count by 0.5s. I don't need to crowd everything in to a little space here, so I'm going to count by 0.5s. And label my intervals on my x-axis first. So there's 1, 2, 3. Because that's as far as I'm going to graph, I don't need to put a lot more on there. It's worth it to take a little bit of time to set up your axes properly. Now the highest y value I'm going to graph here is a 9. Well, they're both 9s there. So I could probably count by 0.5s again. But I think that will be crowded. So I'm just going to count by 1s, but I'm going to label every second one. Yeah, that would be too crowded to count by 0.5s. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Now, when you're graphing transformations, when you're putting multiple parabolas on one grid, you would probably just count by 1s and put your axes through the middle because you might be needing more of the graph than more of the grid than what I've put here. Now I'm going to put my points on. So I will do that. You can press pause and do the same thing. And when you come back, I will have all of my red dots on for my quadratic. And then we connect them with a smooth curve. Remember, parabola is a U shape. It's not a V. So a smooth curve with arrows on those top ends. So there we have it, our very basic parabola with no transformations, y equals x squared. And most of what you're going to do today, a lot of what you're going to do on Desmos, of course, the The computer is going to do all that for you. It's going to do the graphing for you, but it's important you're comfortable with this function. So I'm going to put a few coordinates on here because we're going to talk about transformations today, and you need to see where these coordinates that were on the basic function, where they got transformed to. 0, 0 being the vertex, and that's always really important to find out where your new vertex is. So we've got, it said label the vertex and the axis of symmetry. I'm going to switch colors now. My axis of symmetry goes right through the middle, and it's going to be right on the y-axis. So my axis of symmetry is actually going to be right there, but it's going to be hard for you to see. I'm going to draw it maybe a little bit beside it so that you can see it, but we want to draw in the axis of symmetry with the dotted line. So draw a vertical axis of symmetry right there. My axis of symmetry is a line. It has an equation, and I'll just put it at the bottom. It is x equals 0. So your axis of symmetry always comes from this number right here, that part of your vertex. So there we have the basic parabola, which we're going to come to call the parent parabola, with no transformations, the axis of symmetry. And the last thing that I want to point out before you go and work on your computers or phones with Desmos is the vertex form. The textbook that we're using this year, last year, this was an H and a K. We're using a D and C this year, so you're just going to have to get used to those letters. We're using K for something else. Our textbook uses K for a different parameter. So D and C are the parameters for horizontal shift and vertical shift. So these are what we're focusing on today when you work on Desmos. So now you can go and continue on with your handout by using the Desmos graphing calculator and filling in the handout as you go.